First tonight to Kenya, a country seen as the business and diplomatic hub of East Africa, but with a democratic record that is becoming increasingly patchy. Over the years, several elections have been marred by disputes, violence and allegations of vote rigging. And yesterday's announcement declaring William Ruto as the winner of the presidential election held last week was made amid similar disputes, with 4 election commissioners denouncing the count and disowning the result. And in the last few hours, the man who ostensibly lost the election, Raila Odinga, has described Monday's announcement of the election result as illegal and said he would mount a legal challenge. He was speaking at a news conference.
What we saw yesterday was a travesty and a blatant disregard of the Constitution and the laws of Kenya by Mr. Chebukati and a minority of IEBC commissioners. The law is clear on the role of the chairperson of the IEBC. The law does not vest in the chairperson the powers of a dictator to rule the IEBC unilaterally. But suffice it to note that we will be pursuing all constitutional and legal options available to us. We will do so because we regard the many flaws in the elections and the wrongs committed by the IEBC as fatal to the process and the outcome announced by Mr. Chebukati.
We state categorically that the results of the presidential election held in August 9, 2022, declared and announced by Mr. Wafula Chebukati on August 15, 2022, belonged to himself and do not represent the declaration and announcement by Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission.
ILOG notes that despite ongoing challenges and clear areas for reform, the 2022 general elections registered improvements from the 2017 process and culminated in an enhanced, open and secured results management process.
Well, for more on the fallout from those elections in Kenya, I'm joined now on the line by the Kenyan journalist, current affairs analyst and publisher of the community newspaper Informer East Africa, Julius Mbaluto, and in the studio by Professor Tunde Esan, Professor of International Relations with a focus on the history of African elections and democratic developments on the continent. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let me come straight away to you, Julius Mbaluto. This is, of course, your country, Kenya. Talk us through the framework for a legal challenge by Mr. Odinga. What's the legal process? I understand they have up to 7 days to put in a petition at the Supreme Court, and the case will have to be heard and determined within 14 days.
Yeah, indeed, that is the case. It's very important to also note that within these 7 days is when they are supposed to also to produce evidence to support their petition. And it's very important also to do that within time, because this one time that happened, but they didn't actually deliver their evidence in time, and therefore they couldn't, their case didn't have benefit from the time. So timing is key. Next thing is to send a petition, gain their evidence, submit that to the Supreme Court, and then of course then the Supreme Court will be having 14 days to prosecute the case and come up with a ruling.
And stay with us, Julius. Let me bring in Professor Tunde Esan, who has a lot of experience about these things, not just in Kenya, but across the continent of Africa, looking at the various scenarios that could come up from this, Professor. If the petition is overruled and there isn't enough evidence for the election to be overturned, then Mr. Ruto would be sworn in obviously shortly after. But if the petition is valid, then a repeat election would have to be held, I understand, within 30 days. And we do recall, don't we, that in 2017, the Supreme Court did invalidate an election?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Charles. It is quite interesting, and sometimes you look at what is happening in Kenya, you see the development that is very, that all of us are fairly familiar with in Africa, people rejecting the outcome of elections, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly. Looking at Kenya's situation, it is obvious that Mr. Raila is feeling aggrieved because this is his fifth time at contesting for the presidency. And looking at his background, he has been a fighter for a fairly long time. I suspect what I see is that, look, the underlying factor in African politics is what is at play in Africa, in Kenya. What I mean by underlying factor is that the undercurrent of ethnicity and all that, and other factors, you understand, conflicting interest. For Juliana Cherera, who is the vice president of the Independent Electoral and Boundary Commission, to have come out and say, look, can hold another press conference with 4 out of 7 members of the Electoral Commission, that's a very serious case. So we look forward to it, but what I feel strongly is that in all this, it will strengthen Kenyan democracy.
Yes, well, that's an interesting point. So let me come back to you, Julius, because just listening to the professor there and emphasizing the significance of the vice chair of the Electoral Commission sort of going her own way with the other ones. I mean, is there an element of partisanship here? Because we know, for instance, that they were appointed, those 4 commissioners were appointed just before the election by President Uhuru Kenyatta. And some people have suggested that there could be an element of partisanship. What are your thoughts yourself as a Kenyan?
I see no partisanship from these 4 commissioners because it was a constitutional duty for the president to endorse the appointment. Actually, it looks like it's a president who does the appointment. Not at all. These are people, when they are appointed, their names are mentioned, they get even vetted by the parliament. So it's not a small appointment or a one day picking up someone and telling them do that. That's not the case. So they went through processes to be appointed. And it was actually very important to make these appointments because since 2017 general elections, several, I think almost 3 commissioners also resigned in the same IEBC. Similar situation happened. They resigned and the IEBC was divided. So it took time, long time, without commissioners. But now, towards the general election 2022, they had to appoint commissioners. Otherwise, it was not, it didn't have quorum to conduct election without all these 4 commissioners. So in terms of partisanship, I don't see it because when you look into them, or even when you listen to them talking, they're saying they were okay with everything that was happening. Election was conducted fine, and everything was happening okay until it came to the tallying of the votes, the presidential votes, there at the Bomas of Kenya. That is where the problem comes, because they say that number one, their boss, Wafula Chebukati, stopped talking to them, and also he stopped also showing them what he should have been showing them, like in terms of tallied votes. They are talking about even transmission to the public, which was supposed to be happening on a big screens within the Bomas of Kenya. As tallied votes kept on increasing, that was supposed to be reflected on the screens. They are saying that that was not happening either. And therefore, when they use the word opaqueness, it is just lack of transparency. And this lack of transparency is happening from their chair, their boss. And that's why they had to just walk out, because they were like, fine, whatever you are going to announce, we are not party to it. Earlier, Charles, today, one of these 4 commissioners, she also took an issue with the percentage, because they're saying the percentage that was supposed to be split between the 2 presidential candidates was definitely over 100%, which again, they are saying, if you imagine 0.01 is equivalent to 140,000 votes, then any little percentage can flip the winner would to a different direction, and therefore they had an issue with that as well. So
Right.
I think they are doing a noble duty. They are doing their job. Of course, it's a very delicate moment. It's actually very bold of them to have done that, because Charles, we have seen one of the IEBC officials, he disappeared and he was found dead. So for them actually to do that, it was a very bold step to take. Maybe they would have just said, let whatever is going to be, and they keep quiet for fear. So I see them as very patriotic, Kenyan citizens who stood for their truth and maybe justice.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll come back to you in a minute, and thank you for that assessment. Professor Esan, you were talking about this earlier, Julius was talking about it. The commissioners, essentially 4 out of 7 of them, rejected that process. Does their rejection matter very much from a legal perspective?
Well, that's quite interesting. Let me say something about Kenya, the outcome of the election. Mr. William Ruto got 7,176,141 votes, while Raila Odinga got 6,940,000 votes. What it means basically, that I don't understand what people mean when they say 101% of the votes, but that's it will be very, very difficult, let me be honest with you, because they have just 7 days to file an appeal or petition with the Supreme Court. That's quite tasking, especially for an election in a country of about 650,000, about 580,000 square kilometers, 47 counties, you understand? It's a fairly big country. And when you look at the logistics and all the put-ups, that's a big challenge. But whatever it is, like I keep saying, it's a plus for Kenya. It will be a plus for Kenya at the end of the day that, look, we are going through this election, we have gone through this election, and the winner has emerged. There are contending forces, and there are ascents and descents. So let's watch out and see.
Right, but let me stay with you, Professor Esan, because I'm curious to know how people like you are assessing the performance of the Electoral Commission, which was obviously so critical here.
Yeah. It is difficult because what is happening is that what we see mostly is the outcome of the results. Like we have seen, Mr. Wafula Chebukati, the chairman of the Independent Electoral Commission and Boundary Commission, released the result. He's the one that released, and 4 out of the 7 commissioners say, look, they are objecting. Behind the scene, a lot of things may have happened, from the reaction of the majority of the electoral commissioners. So we cannot critically or honestly say, okay, maybe they have done perfectly well or otherwise, until we wait for the event as they unfold.
No, absolutely. Let me return to you, Julius Mbaluto. You are, of course, a well-known current affairs journalist. I mean, you're the publisher of Informer East Africa, and you've got your people, spread across Kenya. Many of Mr. Odinga's agents, in rejecting the results, alleged irregularities and vote rigging. Is there any evidence of that?
There are times that even during the voting, a few people were caught, with ballot papers and transferring, in terms of being found in a place where people were voting with unexplained ballot papers being carried in a different way. And also, Charles, even before the voting began, there was this moment of, I think it was Argentinian men who were arrested at the airport, showing up at the airport. And they had this IEBC, equipment talking about they were supposed to be working with IEBC. They were traveling on expired passports and all that. That really cast a lot of doubts. And also the idea that in the end, officially, there was no evidence that the company they were supposed to have come from Argentina was actually legitimate company. So that started to throw doubts within the electoral process. And therefore, also the way the IEBC handled that particular moment, the particular episode, it was also very like wanting, because they say, yeah, they are our people, but there's no evidence, and they were not actually officially supposed to report to IEBC directly. And these are people we are talking about. They are passwords of the to equipment belonging to IEBC, and they are foreigners, you know, in an explained presence on the ground, being arrested at the airport in Kenya. So that brought a lot of doubts, you know, as to people trying to hurt and all that. I think when we look into what happened, and that I think 2 times they saw 2 people being caught by members of the public with extra ballot papers. All these processes in terms of attempts to rig also and also allegations of hacking of the IEBC system didn't help a lot, you know. But when you look into the entire process, it was peaceful and it finished well. But even the commissioners are not pointing out at those processes. They are like the very last moment at the Bomas of Kenya, presidential tally. This is where they claim actually things didn't work in their favor. Supporters of Odinga, Raila Odinga, as a mere One Kenya party, they took a huge chunk of time trying to say, before you go ahead and announce the winner, is our constitutional right to verify the result and see what you're about to announce. But they were not granted this particular opportunity to see the results, verify the results before the chair ended up declaring Ruto winner. And this is something also being supported by the commissioners, saying that even themselves, when there's that time, he stopped talking to them, and he started like to unilaterally do everything without a consultation and speaking to them or involving them. Whereas it's supposed to be a process that is actually a teamwork that the IEBC is seen as one. So we have a situation, I don't know how even legally it stands, whereby we are getting an announcement of a presidential winner from undivided commission, electoral commission.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the moment, we don't actually know for sure that they're going to file a petition, although it does appear that they're going to do so. But let me come to you, Professor Esan. You are, of course, a historian of sorts when it comes to elections and democratic developments across the continent. This is the 4th straight bitterly contested election in Kenya, isn't it?
Yes. Contest and disagreements in Kenya is almost, it's almost, we can almost say that it's part of Kenyan politics for the past 20 years. 2002, when multi-party politics was introduced, and you have multi-party systems, there was a bitter contest. And I remember Kiwaki won the election, the one who succeeded Arap Moi. Then, of course, 2007, the famous 2007 election, where there was a bitter contest between, one party, the 2 parties, the 2 major parties, and it led to the death of about 1,500 people in Kenya. That was a very serious one. Then 2013, then 2017 election. So it has literally been part of Kenya election for a fairly long time. But I'm very sure with time, they will get over this.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the evolution of democracy, I suppose. Yeah. And Julius, Mr. Odinga, petitioning the courts and disputing the results in 3 previous elections. This was his 5th bid, and he very narrowly lost by only about, roughly 200,000 votes. So there is an enormous sense of loss within the coalition he leads and amongst his supporters, isn't there?
Indeed. I think on one hand, if it was just Raila Odinga himself to make a decision, I wouldn't even be surprised if he just shook the hand of William Ruto and maybe call it a day and say, yeah, for the sake of peace, because he loves peace. And he has played a tremendous, huge role in Kenya's politics in terms of transforming, increasing the democratic space. He's been detained so many times and is one icon of freedom in terms of Kenya. And even if he retires, he has that legacy that no one can ignore. And when history will be written, I think Raila Odinga will be on the right side of history when he, as seen by Kenyans and politically. But the problem we have, Charles, is because Raila Odinga is leading a coalition. And therefore, each individual politician there, they have their political interest. And to just tell them we have lost, that's not good enough. So a lot of pressure to challenge the results probably emanates from actually a lot of his followers and those to whom he's in coalition with, because they cannot accept it's over and that's it. Because of course, if it, Azimio party wins or Azimio One Kenya wins, of course, then we are talking about they're going to have positions, they're going to be politically active. So I think it's a huge loss to his supporters. And also, we're not talking about politicians because he has, let's say when we talk about like last general election, the country was almost split half. And one of the halves of Kenya, they voted for Raila, even more than half. And therefore, we are talking about the ordinary folks, the you and me on the street. They have a lot of sense of loss because for this particular one, they were thinking, this is it. He has won. And, to credit of IEBC putting the tallying and everything on a portal, it was successful. But you see, Charles, there is time, every different media house in Kenya was coming out with different results.
Yeah.
I remember
that was a problem, wasn't it? I mean, that was a big problem. But we've just got a few minutes left on this chat. We focused a lot, haven't we, Professor Esan, on Raila Odinga and, if you like, the protest movement against the results of the election. But let's actually talk a little bit in the few minutes that we've got left of the man who ostensibly won the presidential election. Is William Ruto, from what you know of him, really a man of the people? All this about him being a hustler and rising from below to the top? I mean, or is this a carefully constructed narrative that won him votes?
Thank you very much, Charles. It is interesting to know that William Ruto has been a public figure since 1992 as a very young man, a youth leader. When Arap Moi was the president of Kenya, he was a youth leader. He was very active. He was fairly known, and he grew through the ranks, becoming a minister somewhere along the line, and joining the opposing forces. So he has not necessarily been on, a newcomer in Kenyan politics. He started early and grew through the ranks. So William Ruto is quite interesting. Most people don't even know that he comes from one of the biggest ethnic groups, Kalenjin, you understand? And that's what people are saying, the land of the Kikuyus, the land of the Kalenjins, the land of the Luos, the Kwambas, and some of these these are undercurrents that played out in this election. You understand? The two big tribes, and when you have such a base, you cannot dismiss him easily. I'm not saying that, look, nobody can say, it depends on the Electoral Commission to say, look, or the Supreme Court to say this is the outcome of, but William Ruto has been a fighter for a fairly long time. He cannot easily be dismissed. And don't forget, he's the deputy president of Kenya, as it were, even today. So William Ruto has been in focus, he has been a public figure, he has been a fighter for a fairly long time, a fairly successful farmer, and a fairly known political figure fighting against two dynasties, the Uhuru Kenyatta dynasty and the Raila Odinga dynasty. So that's where it's quite interesting. But he's been a fighter.
It is very interesting. Yeah. Let me bring you in for the final word, Julius Mbaluto. We've got about 30 seconds or so. I mean, much as he is self-made William Ruto. I mean, he's forged very strong political links, and he's been in privileged political circles and has used that to his advantage, hasn't he?
When we see wheelbarrows being used and all that, and the narrative of hustler is not a hustler. If you own choppers, if you own almost so huge chunks of land and a lot of investments here and there, you're not a hustler. And you never will be. So that one is totally out. Self-made, it differs on what context when you talk about, him being close with the former president, Daniel Arap Moi, introducing him to politics, and also the support. And they're like seen as the children of Moi in terms of politics, him and Uhuru Kenyatta. And they have many times acknowledged that was the case. So self-made, I don't know how far that goes. When you say you're a chicken seller, but you end up buying a chopper, you don't end up buying chopper by selling chicken, seriously. So therefore, that one is neither. It's just a narrative. It's just a political gimmick to sell to the people who are ordinary folks on the street to attract and get them to vote for him.
Right. Well, here I was feeling rather, optimistic and great, and you had to spoil that. But anyway, Julius, thank you very much indeed. And of course, Professor Esan, thank you very much. Julius Mbaluto, who is a Kenyan journalist, current affairs analyst and publisher of the community newspaper Informer East Africa. And of course, Professor Tunde Esan, who is Professor of International Relations with a focus on the history of African elections and democratic developments on the continent. Thank you very much indeed to you both.